Welcome to my channel. This is part 1 of reflections on Immanuel Kant's a priori theory and the logic of human action. What I would like to explain in this 3-part video series is this. Economics is not an empirical science. You cannot find out and validate economic laws by testing or by experience, that is. Rather, economics is actually an a priori science of human action, with its laws literally revealed through thinking, not through trying them out. This is a downright revolutionary idea today, an idea which the Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises put forward and defended about 100 years ago, and which deserves the greatest attention, especially today, a time of, as I would call it, anti-enlightenment and great confusion. To explain this in more detail, it makes sense to start with the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant was a philosopher of the Enlightenment and lived from 1724 to 1804. In 1781, Kant published his major work, Critique of Pure Reason. Especially through this book, Kant's influence on philosophy, science, and even broader intellectual traditions was and still is immense and far-reaching. Reason plays a central and foundational role in Immanuel Kant's philosophy. Now you may ask, what is reason? Well, according to Kant, reason is the faculty of deriving the particular from the general and representing the latter according to principles and as necessary. It can therefore also be described as the faculty of judging and acting according to principles. In Critique of Pure Reason, Kant explores 3 core questions. What can we know? What can we hope for? What should we do? For Kant, the question, what can we know, is about epistemology, that is, the theory of knowledge. The question, what can we hope for, is about theology. And the question, what should we do, is about ethics. For us, Kant's epistemological considerations are important at this point, that is, his insights into the origin, composition, and limits of our knowledge. In this context, Kant was particularly interested in whether so-called metaphysics could be viewed as a science. What does metaphysics mean? The word metaphysics comes from Greek and means something like the science that deals with the things that are beyond immediate human perception, things we cannot see, hear, or touch. Metaphysical questions include, does God exist as the creator of the universe? Is the human soul immortal? Do humans have free will? Or is the world designed appropriately for humans? Insofar, metaphysics is the science of the boundaries of human reason, Kant writes. Against this backdrop, he asks, can metaphysics reliably answer the questions above? Is metaphysics suitable as a science? Can it provide reliable knowledge like other accepted sciences? In search of an answer, Kant agrees as a starting point with the prevailing opinion of his time that all our knowledge stems from experience. Things in the world touch our senses. We see, hear, and feel something. However, according to Kant, the temporal beginning of knowledge does not mean that it is also its objective origin. Rather, Kant sees the knowledge gained through experience as a composite. It is our human cognitive ability that allows the impressions gained through experience to become knowledge. And so he writes, although all our knowledge begins with experience, it does not follow that it arises from experience alone. The objects of our experience, so Kant, depend on our ability to gain knowledge, and we don't see things in the world as they are, but only as we can recognize them. It is in this context in which Kant distinguishes between two concepts, namely a priori and a posteriori. A posteriori means after the experience has been made. Statements a posteriori are dependent on experience, they are empirical. To give you an example, the stovetop is hot because I found out that the stovetop is hot by touching it beforehand. A posteriori statements are not necessarily true. Why? Because one can never rule out that an a posteriori statement that is currently viewed as true will not at some point in the future be refuted as false by a new observation. Now let us turn to a priori statements. A priori literally means in advance, that is, before any experience. However, this before any experience can be interpreted in two ways. First, we can see an a priori statement as true or false without having to resort to our senses, to our experience, to seeing, hearing and feeling. Second, all components of the a priori statement, including the concepts and words used in it, do not come from experience, but from the basic endowment of our human mind. I would like to explain this briefly. An example of an immediately obvious a priori statement is this. Bachelors are unmarried. The adjective unmarried is already included in the subject bachelor. You don't have to have experience to see the sentence bachelors are unmarried as true. The statement is an analytical a priori. For Kant, analytical means disaggregated, meaning that the adjective unmarried is already contained in the subject of the sentence bachelor. Being unmarried is what defines a bachelor. Such an analytical a priori is indisputably true. However, one will object that the term bachelor itself undoubtedly comes from experience. Knowing what a bachelor is, of course, is not independent of experience, but rather dependent on experience. Who would agree otherwise? When Kant talks about a priori, he is essentially not concerned with any kind of a priori statements, but rather with pure a priori statements. The pure in Kant's book title, Critique of Pure Reason, refers exactly to this point. By the addition pure, Kant means statements that operate with intellectual concepts and ideas that are completely independent of experience, that have no experience mixed into them. For Kant, an example of a pure a priori statement would be a mathematical statement like the following. In a circle, all points on the circumference are equidistant from the center. This statement is true regardless of experience. We cannot prove the statement true or false through experience. On the one hand, we cannot measure all possible circles and thereby conclusively classify the statement as true or false. On the other hand, we never can draw or produce a circle perfectly, because there are always measurement and manufacturing errors that prevent this. Kant would view the sentence, in a circle all points on the circumference are equidistant from the center, as a pure a priori statement, because we cannot prove its truth value with any experience, but only with experience-independent concepts that come from our human reason, our understanding. With this, Kant refers to pure concepts of understanding, that is, to a priori concepts that have no experience mixed into them, and also in terms of their content, they result from our understanding. Pure concepts of understanding are fundamental to how we structure and make sense of our experience. They are necessary for making sense of sensory data and judgments in the world. In Kant's words, the same function that gives unity to the various representations in a judgment also gives unity to the mere synthesis of different representations in an intuition, which generally speaking is called the pure concept of understanding. I should add, synthesis refers to the mental process by which the mind combines or unites different representations such as sensations into a coherent unified experience or judgment. Pure a priori concepts are no longer derived from other general concepts, and so following Aristotle, Kant also uses the term categories for them, or the basic concepts of thinking. The pure a priori is always already presupposed when we deal with empirical concepts. Kant derives the pure a priori concepts of understanding from his so-called table of judgments, which then leads to his so-called table of categories. But even if his table of categories is not completely, consistently derived and filled, as it is claimed by many philosophers, Kant did nevertheless present some concepts that can justifiably be classified as pure a priori concepts of understanding. For example, there are logical terms or logical operators. Think, for instance, of conjunction that connects statements with the term and, or take negation, through which statements are denied using the term not. Terms as individual thing, point in time, relationship, cause, effect, change, and many others can also be identified as purely a priori concepts of understanding, according to Kant. Together with the aforementioned logical operators, they represent intellectual concepts which are presupposed for us making perceptions in the first place. Let me remind us. The pure a priori concepts of understanding do not stem from experience. They are the result of an advanced performance of the human actor, and without them we could not constitute objective things in our experience. With Kant's line of thinking, we ultimately reach an extremely important insight, namely that we prescribe certain properties to the things we experience. We see the world as we can recognize it, not necessarily as it is. In other words, there are conditions under which we make experience, and it is the pure a priori concepts that make the so-called synthetic a priori judgments possible. In Kant's words, it sounds like this. The conditions of the possibility of experience in general are at the same time conditions of the possibility of the objects of experience, and therefore have objective validity in a synthetic judgment a priori. Kant says that there are necessary conditions of experience that come about when we exercise our cognitive faculty. All objects of experience must satisfy these conditions. Therefore, the statements that claim that objects of experience are subject to these conditions are synthetic statements a priori. And synthetic statements a priori are true for us, cannot be denied without causing a logical contradiction. With them we actually have the possibility of being able to make true statements about reality. What theoretical consequences this has for economics will be explained in part 2 and part 3 of this video series. I hope the explanations up to this point have been insightful and enlightening for you. And if so, please like and share the video, follow my channel, and above all, watch part 2 and part 3 of the video series. Thank you very much for your attention.